Hello, ethnically correct land. We have missed you so much. It is good to be back into the swing of things here in this land, and we are very excited to re-engage in discourse and discussion. That is what we do best. We do D&D like no other. And I am joined, as always, by the two formidable women that make up the 2/3 majority of this podcast. To my left is Miss Winter White. Welcome back, Winter.
Thank you. So happy to be back.
And to my right is the lovely Tehu Smythe. How are you, Tehu?
Hi, Alex. Thank you. Good. Happy to be back, too.
And we are also joined in studio by our producer, Dan Howes, who is in high spirits today. And just wanted to share with all of you that we have been thinking about you. You've been in our hearts and in our minds because, wow, it has been a very historical couple of days or several days here in the United States of America. For those of you that might not be fully aware, we have had rising tensions and a real climactic situation in terms of the tensions between especially the Black Lives Matter contingency that is now a national movement, and then the police departments of America, specifically the police department in Dallas and the police department in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So this opens up the conversation in ethnically correct land. How do we feel about the situation? How do we assess what is going on? How can we color the discussion with our own experiences with the police, etc.? So, Winter, why don't you kick us off with your evaluation about all of this? I know that when I posted something on Facebook, your mother immediately replied and said, I think you have good points. So I think generationally, we have diverse opinions even within the Black community. So I want you to get us started.
Well, I'd just like to say first, as a Black woman in America living during this time and all of the opinions swirling, it's both exhausting just to live through and see all the stories that are coming out. It's exhausting. It's sad. It's hurtful. It's angering. And I, go from feeling completely saddened and hurt by, white people and not just white people, because it's not just white people who feel this way. I get hurt and saddened by Black people who say all lives matter. I get hurt and saddened by anybody who doesn't understand where Black people are coming from when we talk about this narrative, because I almost feel like our voices don't mean anything, that our stories, they're always a but, or it's our fault. I don't know if you guys saw the BET speech by Jesse Williams. He recently got the humanitarian awards on the BET Awards, and it was just absolutely riveting. One of the things that he said that really struck out to me was, she would be alive if she hadn't acted so free. We're supposed to be free. We have been a part of building America from its inception, but still we have to explain and have to not act so free. Explain why, and act almost like we are still second-class citizens, even though this nation was built on our backs. Mm-hmm. And to not even have empathy from certain groups of people breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. I mean, aside from just seeing Black men shot on camera, dying on camera, and there is still no empathy, that just baffles me. It baffles me, and I feel like there is this thought from white America too that, or not just white America. I don't want to put it on just white America, on a part of America where if it doesn't touch my life, then it doesn't exist, or it's not important, or I'm not racist, so therefore why do I need to even think or say or feel anything about this? And I think that is so irresponsible and wrong and, like I said, hurtful.
I think I just read something on Huffington Post, and my memory is shot today. But there was a man who said, I am a white fellow that has blonde hair. I have a blonde wife. I have kids that are blonde and blue eyed and green eyed, and this is, he said, it's going to sound racist, but I understand, after giving this a lot of research and a lot of thought, that I am in a position of power and privilege. And that understanding that, I think, is part of the initial process. And as a person of Hispanic origin, I realize that I am halfway in between. So I have had really positive experiences with the police, and then I've had really negative experiences with the police. And I feel like in Los Angeles especially, and in big urban centers, if you will, where we have very segregated situations where, this community is this color and then this community is this color. The police in this community are expected to exert these behaviors because they're dealing with really bad people. And in this other community, everybody is an upstanding, citizen or whatever. That those two, that dichotomous sort of reality is accepted. And I think what we need to do as a society is understand there are innate, not innate necessarily, but there are absolute differences in the way that policing is done, and that the way people are treated based on color, which is the most immediate and visible thing. And so what this man is saying is, I understand that I come from a place of privilege, and that I don't have to question my existence, that I don't have to question, or that authority is never really saying, does this person belong here? Is this person in the right zip code? Is this person okay? There's always like an extra layer of proving thyself. And very recently, for example, in my situation, I'll say this. Depending on what I'm wearing, I may get treated very amazingly by law enforcement and by people of authority. And if I'm not dressed to code, for example, I may get a very distinct or different treatment. So, for example, I was at Ralph's in downtown Los Angeles not too long ago. I was wearing my workout clothes and I had a hat on, and I was down the aisle to get toothpaste, and then the security immediately positioned himself at the end of the aisle, grabbed his buckle, and gave me a look like, you're being monitored, and gave me this very stern, hello, sir. And I felt like every move I was making was being scrutinized. And I'm not used to that at all. But again, there is a level of profiling that's done that you just know exists. And, I think in the extreme, we have these cases where black men are not given any kind of latitude or benefit of the doubt when it comes to law enforcement. I feel like if there is any threshold that is passed within the first 30 seconds of the exchange, it automatically escalates really quickly, and then there's a loss of patience, because that police officer immediately turns into a binary situation where it's like, good, evil, this person's evil, I'm gonna take him out. And I think, Tehu, you had some experience.
Yeah, I was
with
just going to bring up something about that. Since we're on the topic of racial profiling, I want to share with you guys some very interesting information that I received firsthand from a police officer who was actually training to be a psychologist in my program, who came to speak with us. And, he was there, and he was kind of being really interrogated by about 200 or so mental health professionals. And he was talking about the fact that, because one of the questions that was asked of him is what is the training that police officers go through in terms of diversity. So, for example, in my field, as a mental health therapist, you go through 4.5 months of diversity training where you discuss particular ethnic groups and understand and really get involved in the culture, because it really impacts your work. A police officer, when we ask them, what is the training that you get on diversity, his answer was about 2 weeks. And I remember there was absolute silence in the room when they said that. And then I was bold enough actually to ask, and what are you told? What on earth are you told as a police officer? And what he very sadly and shamefully actually admitted was that we were told that, there is particular profiling in particular neighborhoods. And ultimately, if you're somebody of an ethnicity and particularly of color, shoot. And it caused such an outrage. But that is what they're told. Young officers going into the academy, that's all they're told about diversity. Often they're coming from very segregated communities themselves. They're not being told what to do in situations. I blame the training of it, because there needs to be a system of supervision, of being overlooked, of something. You can't just be left to your own devices to make decisions. And sometimes these officers are very, very young, and they just aren't told any better. And no one seems to care. So the other thing I wanted to respond to was Winter's statement that how she feels so exhausted. And I'm not Black, obviously, but I'm equally as exhausted and tired of hearing the same stories. And I'm particularly disturbed when I hear the stories of what you said, of there's individuals out there who go, well, look, I'm not Black, this doesn't really affect me. Here I am bumbling along in my privileged life. How does this bother me or affect me? I'm so tired of hearing that discourse. It's so ignorant, and it's so disrespectful to people who are of different ethnic diverse backgrounds, because there's certain profilings that we have to live with on a daily basis, which, let's face it, unfortunately, the mainstream culture doesn't. And it saddens me, because it's ignorant and it's not mindful, and it's just sad. And it also angers me, because when somebody makes that statement, automatically you're dismissing it as being irrelevant, or not wanting to rock the boat, or not wanting to say something that might offend somebody. But that is the biggest offensive statement in itself, by just saying, well, this doesn't concern me. Just shows that you're completely disregarding everything to do with diversity. And this is the problem, you need to have the tolerance and accept difference first before you can move towards unity. Otherwise, you have what we have currently in the U.S., which is major racial tensions going on. And people really need to wake up and just think, look, it does affect me. I live in this world. Let me be proactive. Let me do something. I don't need to be Black or Hispanic to do it. I just need to care and be aware.
And at the very least, empathize.
Yes.
Empathize. That's the one word that I would say to people of all races. Try to find some empathy and some common ground in all of these stories, not just the black and white narrative.
Right.
But think about, you are a mother, you are a father, you are a sister, a friend, a brother, whatever, and try to put yourself in these families' shoes, and understand, regardless of whether you think that the cop may have had a reason to shoot or whatever, there is someone who lost a loved one. There are people who feel hurt. Understand, or not, just empathize.
Right.
Try.
The lack of empathy and compassion at the moment in our society is shocking to me. What are people concerning themselves with? This is what makes us essentially human, being able to empathize. Otherwise, we're no different from the animal species. Compassion, these humanitarian, important, personality traits are what distinguishes us from the other species. Otherwise, we're exactly the same. And it seems to have left the building.
And you know what? I really would like to understand where all the Christian churches are in regard to all of this, because I ask myself, the pastors and priests and leaders, and let's go further, and the rabbis and imams of the nation, what are they telling their congregation when it comes to these things? Because if our own religious leaders are not inspiring us to confront our racial and our racial proclivity to put people in boxes and label them as less than, that is very ungodly. When you say this group of people is not worthy of the same level of treatment as everybody else, you are preaching a gospel that is not in the spirit of Moses or Jesus or Allah. You know what I mean? It is diametrically opposed. And but growing up, I remember we were not necessarily told in Bible study or catechism or even in confirmation that we had a responsibility to our black brothers and sisters. I mean, I had a racist mother and father at some level. And I had to check them so many times. I'm like, you can't call them this. No, they weren't animals in Africa that were, sort of rescued and brought to the United States. Those are bad. Those are bad apples. And it's a really horrible situation. But I can't remember my priest or religious leader ever talking about racism.
Because I think that you would have to believe there is racism to talk about it, right? You would have to first think that people are being treated unfairly based on their skin color, and then you would have to find something wrong with that. I think that we come from a generation that was just out of, civil rights and kind of living the dreams of those people who fought and tried hard to, create a world of diversity and inclusion and all of that. So we come from their labor, from the fruits of their labor. So there are no more dogs biting and, water hoses and the things that you saw back in the 60s, 50s and 60s. So to a lot of people, because these things aren't happening anymore, it's better. And people think too that everybody is starting out on the same foot in America. Mm-hmm. That I made myself something from nothing. I came here from this country, which maybe your parents thought. I came here from this country and I didn't speak the language and I didn't do this. And you see, I'm living this completely separate life than those black people over there who, yell and are loud and are completely different culturally than my people. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of ignorance and not understanding culture.
And there is a lot of ignorance. And I just want to tell all our listeners out there just to remember this one thing, please, and share it with your loved ones and your friends and your dear ones. The U.S., this glorious country that we live in, was built on difference, and different people from different parts of the world immigrated into this country to make, and that's what it prided itself on, diversity, difference, okay? So that is where the history of the U.S. lies. So with that, you need to learn to tolerate difference. And there is a major lack of tolerating difference on any level at the moment. And it just, I feel like it's a little cauldron bubbling, about to overflow and spill. Race relations are in a terrible state. I mean, they said the Rodney King race riots, they're waiting for them to come back, except this time they're going to be a lot worse. I read this statement as well on with a response to the sort of things that are going on. And it was a very interesting statement. That was actually made by, again, a Caucasian man saying that there is no reason to think past my own privileges because it doesn't affect me. And that is exactly what we're trying to get away from, because that is exactly the root of our problem. If every person and the majority mainstream is thinking that way, of course we're gonna find ourselves in the predicament that we're in.
Well, and I think that there is a daunting fear by a large swath of white America that there is a decrease in dominance and power. And, we can talk about the different reasons for that, one of which is pure demographics. White America is not having as many children as ethnic America. And so the numbers, are tilting. And until that changes, then you're going to find a situation where there are going to be more and more people that are not, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which is what this country branded itself on being from a very long time. I mean, we were a British colony for a minute, and then we declared independence, and that's how we established ourselves, and that's how we marketed ourselves to the world. And it is a real identity crisis. And I understand, I can completely understand if you have been raised to believe that this country looks a certain way, and all of a sudden you feel like, oh my, I'm being displaced, or my power is slowly eroding. You have to question, okay, how am I going to continue living and thriving? And so, but I don't think that people understand that it's not a zero-sum game. It has to be all about how we are all Americans and we all want to contribute to the good and well-being for everybody, regardless of race, color, gender, or identification. But those kind of conversations cannot be had unless we live in communities where we have opportunities to talk to and mingle with people that are of diverse backgrounds.
I couldn't agree more. All men are not created equal by any shape or form. That is a complete untrue statement, and I'll tell you why. Precisely, agreeing with both of you. If you don't have access to resources and you are struggling very hard, I can say this because I've spent a year working in a homeless shelter, with the majority of my clients being African American or Latino. And if you haven't had access to certain major resources, from medical to education to all sorts of things, purely based on where you were born, geographic location, the world you came from, how on earth will you won't agree with that statement. All men are not created equal. How can you even say such a thing? So yes, all men are created equal, some more equal than others. That could be a more relevant saying. But the lack of resources is a serious problem. People can't see, they can't even survive easily.
I mean, the three of us sitting in this room, Tehu's probably the most privileged, but we all came from relatively privileged backgrounds in the sense that we had parents that loved us, we had a home, we had food, and we had access to education that gave us the opportunity to look for jobs that are middle class jobs.
All privilege,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that in and of itself is a level of privilege. I know that I have Latino counterparts that had a way steeper climb. And those are the folks that are not equipped to necessarily know how to deal with the police because their parents were always fearful of the police.
Right.
But their children may change that fear into contempt because they see injustice, etc. So when they have an opportunity to deal with an officer, they're not going to be like, oh my God, you're like John Duffy, like
Right.
my bestie from,
Right.
or I know you,
Right.
or I trust you. There is like this innate distrust, and there's already a sort of implicit violence in the way that I deal with you because you represent an institution that has historically and endemically been so denigrating to the community. And so, I lived through the Rodney King riots of 1992, and I remember everything around me burning down.
Right.
And I remember that people were literally so outraged by the impunity. It's like you had the evidence, and these four cops still had to pay nothing. And it just incensed everybody to the point where it's like they had to manifest and outwardly express the contempt and anger because something had to be done. And what I said on my Facebook post is, when a community has been so disenfranchised because of impunity, because nobody has paid the price for the lives that have been severed and cost, then somebody will retaliate. And it pains me to see that officers who had really nothing to do with the great scheme, they were just basically targets, right? That their lives had to be lost. But when impunity reaches that point, like we've seen in Latin America and in other third world countries, people will take the law into their own hands. And while you may say that is contemptible, that should not happen, there is a part of you that says this was only bound to occur because nothing is being done.
Well, look at what recently happened in the UK with Brexit and what a mess that is, and how the people made the decision. And then I was absolutely outraged, by the way, watching the whole thing go down. I was just receiving texts and calls constantly, and it was just like one of those moments in history where you're watching it and you're going, oh my God, do people even know what they're doing? And like afterwards, people were saying, oh, I'm not sure I made the right decision. They called it regrets it, because then they thought, wait a minute, I thought I was just voting for one thing, but it became another, and a mess. I mean, the aftermath and the effects of that decision and the impact on the economy will take ages to rectify. But at the time, people weren't, this is how things happen. People just, like you said, Alex, they go with that notion of that one thing because it really drives them and they're so angry, and they make a major decision. They come together as a collective group and make a major decision which doesn't serve them or the people of that country particularly well. I mean, this is how revolutions are started. The Iranian Revolution was the same thing. They overthrew the Shah thinking it was going to be a good idea for the country, better for the economy, and actually it ended up going to become an Islamic state instead. Not exactly what people had thought at the time.
Well, to go back to, one of the most famous humanitarians, MLK said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We look at this as just a black and white issue right now, but believe me, we keep continuing this thinking, not understanding, not having empathy, not having a conversation, not being comfortable having a conversation, because I really think that it's not even the extremists that are going to tilt this either way. It's the people who say absolutely nothing. It's the people who act like this doesn't bother.
Why did we all become so bloody complacent?
Yeah.
Why has everybody just become silent?
I think the loss of Oprah as the national mediator, I think has had
that doesn't
funny.
help. Sure, I agree.
No, but what I'm saying is,
Are you being serious?
no. Here's the thing.
Okay.
As a society, we have become social media driven.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Everybody has their own silo. They listen. They watch the cable news that speak to their political interests and viewpoints.
Ooh,
right.
I like where you're going with this.
They follow people on social media that speak to them exclusively.
Speak on it.
There isn't a space that is mediated and that everybody sort of comes to.
Oh my God, I never
Right?
even thought about it that way.
Right?
Yeah, that's a really good
100%.
point.
There's Black Twitter. There's, and not that I don't think that we need some of these. There's BT. There's Centric. Who is tuning into Centric and
Which
BT?
keeps us all very
And
segregated.
Very.
Yeah.
Very segregated.
And
you
our
know-
media brings us together.
Yes. I was at an awards show.
There's no communal water hole.
No, there's no place where people come, and Oprah fulfilled that role for
She
many
did.
years.
She did.
And especially for white America, she was the voice that people listened to, and whatever she said, people were willing to try it, and were willing to give it credence and acceptability, etc., because she had found a way to have a powerful voice. And unfortunately for America, she decided that she was too old and tired to play that role, and she sequestered herself in her own cable news channel, and is now only followed by people that are diehard fans. And unfortunately, the person that may have just been flipping the channel on ABC that given day and maybe listened in to the show where she would be talking about these very critical issues is no longer there, because now they're siloed and they are in their narrow paths. And
And people aren't involved with their communities anymore.
Right.
They're just living these selfish existences where they just consume things to do with themselves morning, night, and day. They're not getting involved in their communities. They don't really know what's going on. They're not aware of anything outside of their privileged bubbles.
Yeah.
And so where is the sense? I mean, Alex, I know obviously you attend church. So that is, for example, is you're involved with your community. You get some interaction there, but that's not the norm. Most people don't even do that.
But again, I go to a church that is 100% Hispanic, or to a service that's 100% Hispanic. And I mean, we don't have a single black person And even in the regular English services, it's not like there is that much diversity being on the West Side. As much as liberal religious people think that they are empathetic and understand the cause, it's like, well, do you? You've never even been like east of the 405.
Right.
Well, it's easy to talk, but it requires action
And
to
it
follow
requires-
to make it credible.
and
Otherwise, it doesn't mean
requires-
anything.
It requires us to be willing to hear the other person. It requires, because I think that and I'm not white, but I do have white friends.
Well done, you.
I'm that person. But, and not that they've ever come out and said this to me, but the feeling that I get is that they feel attacked and that they feel like they have to always be on defense. And, whether or not that's true, it's their perspective. So on the flip side, that has to be understood, I think, from a person of color. You can't always be indignant, because if you want to be heard, you have to hear too. So I think that there's the conversation that needs to be had, and both parties have to come to the table and be willing to hear that they're wrong and hear the awful truths about how we view you and how, we've grown up to see the other kind. And just really quick, a story that I think was so eye-opening for me when I was younger. In high school, I went to this diversity camp. My high school in 10th grade sent everybody at Long Beach Polytechnic High School to a diversity camp. And we played this almost like a team building game, but they had all of us kind of go into our own racial circles. So Black people over here, Pacific Islanders over here, Asian people, white people. And so everybody was in the group. And they would ask a question. So a question could be, what group standing here have you heard dances the best? So everybody moved to the Black group, right? What group here have you heard is really great at math? Everybody moved to Asians. Then they started getting really, really intense. What would be the group that your parents would least like you to see date? And everybody moved Black. And what group would you least like to be if you died and came back as another race? Everybody moved to Black. So these conversations were started, and the dialogue was open, and we're kids. And it was hurtful, and there were people crying, and because on our end, we didn't think being Black was that bad. We were like, being Black is dope, and like, but this is the perception, and as kids, you don't realize that that's the perception. But then you start opening a dialogue, and you start to understand why. And I just think that there's a dialogue that needs to happen, and it's not happening because everyone is just thinking about themselves and mentally where they are, and they're exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so many times in like very wealthy Christian neighborhoods, there's this idea that charity should be in the form of, World Vision, and there's these kids dying of hunger in the rest of the world. I would really beseech. That is this word that I'm using very pointedly. I would beseech the religious leaders, especially of America, to stop looking outside of our borders and start looking inside our own communities.
Exactly.
And saying, one good thing that you could do for charity is go into your close by neighborhood, disadvantaged neighborhood, and begin a dialogue with the people in that neighborhood. Because guess what?
Absolutely.
Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? A lot of this issue is economic.
Yeah.
When you have lines of cleavage that overlap, so that if you're poor and Black, this is your big plight, then guess what? That relationship needs to be examined. Because what's interesting is that lighter skinned, richer Black folks do not experience the same treatment from police.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
There have been studies
So
to prove that,
if you're
actually.
Amy Holmes, who is a conservative, blogger, and she's all over CNN, homegirl, sister girl, does not get stopped by cops because she's probably in a Benz. Her hair is always done beautifully. She's got great makeup. She's got her Prada bag in her front seat, and she's repping like the best Taylor Swift song, like at the top of her speakers, right?
Right.
So there is a dimension to this that is very much economic.
Well, and I think you're talking about intersectionality because
Yeah.
even within, if you're a woman, just kind of to play on that, and you are overweight and you are an African American woman, you are going to have a different experience than a slim woman who is dark skinned and has, a certain kind of hair. Like, it's just intersectionality, and that is a part of every group of people. It's not just Black people, it's in the Filipino culture. The lighter Filipinos are, looked at a lot better than darker Filipinos. So, I mean, there's just, in every culture, we have that intersectionality. And I think that the thing is to understand it and to know, where does this come from? Why does this exist? Because there's a reason why all of this exists. And we perpetuate it because we don't even want to talk about it.
Right.
We're so afraid of hearing and I don't know. What do you think that fear is? What is that fear?
It's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of the unknown. I mean, I have a friend who's like, I don't like to date Black guys because of the way they smell.
What?
And I'm can you explain that, please? He's like, no, there's a certain smell that I just have that I'm not necessarily attracted to. And it's like all of these things. And I've said this before. Who you decide to lay in bed with or enter a relationship with is very much indicative of your hierarchy of races. Like, the people that tell me, oh, I don't find that group attractive. No, what that means in subtext is you don't find that group worthy of enough respect for you to enter a relationship with because they are less than you.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay? I mean, let's just get that real, because when true love is there, you don't care about the exterior. But if you have some issue with that group, then there is definitely an underlying thought. And I'm speaking especially to my people that I have now defriended on Facebook, to say, shame on you, because you constantly have these very racist videos that depict Black people in a very horrible light. But when you're called on it and you're questioned, you're like, they say to you, oh, no, I just, I'm okay. But they don't have a single Black friend. Right? And they always have these negative things to say. And so when these kind of situations happen, they're like, oh, well, they had it coming because, etc. And can we say this? I also want to say that if the depiction of Black people that we see on social media is confined to hip hop and gangster rap, I think there's something to be said about how that perception is also detrimental. Not that I feel that it's completely bad, but I think that
it doesn't do us any favors.
I think that if there were a wider variety, or people that kind of gave more credence to just the whole gamut, I think we are at a deficit for like Patti LaBelle's and people that for a certain generation were good representatives.
So I'm, I have my hand on the pulse of the media and social,
you do, honey, you do.
So I have to disagree with that, because I think that you will find more white people in middle America jamming to hip hop than you will find Black people.
But not their parents.
Right, perhaps not their parents, but who
that's
dictates
the
the culture? Who dictates what's cool though? It's not the parents.
But the authorities, right? The people that are in law enforcement, etc. A lot of the folks that are making these types of decisions are over 30.
And you don't think that their kids have any
So their kids might not be afflicted with the same mentality and the same stereotypes, but it's the generation our age and older that refused to accept the wave of cultural heterogeneity that I think is the main culprit, because they're like, I don't relate to that. That is not who I am. Those people are over there. They have their culture, their norms. I'm okay over here in Orange County, and I'm going to be me, and I'm going to listen to this kind of music, and this is my culture. Real Housewives are my only exposure to anything
God
that's
help
real.
you if that's your only
But what I'm
exposure.
saying is, on the Real Housewives,
Yeah.
even the men of the Real Housewives, all the black men, even in Atlanta, how many of them are like amazing, upstanding citizens except Nene Leakes' husband?
Tom, what's his name? Todd, he's a good guy.
Yeah, but his even his mother-in-law was like, he's a loser. He's
Yeah,
not
that's
making any
true.
money.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
of them are
Right.
like these bad representations. It is like, where are the formidable, amazing people? And it's like, for the longest time, I'm like, only Barack Obama.
Right.
So do you think that media is feeding into this kind of idea
Yes.
that black men, black women, we all are just this specific way? We're either super bougie and drama and, fighting, or we're, ghetto and ignorant and there's no
Well,
diverse.
the biggest source
Exactly.
of
Besides
information.
Diana Ross's daughter, right?
Right.
And then that show is now
The problem is
defunct.
our
and-
biggest source of information and knowledge is coming from reality
shows.
So this is not a credible source.
Right.
This is one of my pet peeves about reality shows at the moment.
But that's
People
all
are
we
getting-
have.
That's not all we have. We have
That's all we
books.
look at.
That's all we look at.
Right.
We have a
But-
hell of a lot more. We
we do.
have, that we have courses, we have programs, we have online stuff, we have credible sources that are nothing to do with reality television and Hollywood, but people don't access them.
Exactly.
Because we've all
And-
become a super, driven society that focuses on crap that doesn't matter.
And we do have, if we're looking to the media for, your racial identities, then we do have. I urge white people. I urge not just white people. Sorry, white people. I'm picking on you. Sorry. I urge you to look at television stations like Centric, like TV One. Don't just look at VH1 and BT for if you need to look at the media to understand ethnic people, go outside of what is popular. You are not going to find it on Bravo. You are not going to find it on E!
Correct.
You are not going to find it on anything that is mainstream. You're going to find more so what we really go through and what we really are in our history on some of these other television shows.
For example, this is why my source of news is BBC worldwide. I don't want to hear what the local, because the thing is, guys, media, we all know this, media is manipulated and controlled.
Exactly.
And and unfortunately, a lot of people don't know that it's controlled and manipulated, and your feeded information is how you see fit. That's reality for all media. Right. So certain sources are going to be more swaying to one side or the other. I personally, when I want to get my information, I want to get it from a more diverse worldwide perspective. So I'm going to watch BBC Worldwide. And just to add to what you said, Winter, about watching, different, getting sources of information from different places, I want to add to that as well. Please, if you want to know something also about, I'm not saying it's the answer to the problems, but if you want to understand a little bit more about where Islam is preaching, what is going on, what the terrorist view or perspective might be coming from, please tune into Al Jazeera. Why are you watching Fox News?
Right.
Fox News isn't giving you any correct information. It's giving you very biased, stereotypical, middle America, very ignorant, narrow-minded information. Tune into something else.
Yeah.
Open your mind.
Or try to look for people, I think, in your own lives that might be able to give you a different perspective. I honestly, Winter, I think one of the most fascinating things about being your friend is through you, I've met so many amazing Black women who are so gifted and professional, and they all drive amazing cars, and you guys do brunch like no other. And it's like, I wish that other people had a prism into your lives and into how you go about like looking at the world and processing the world,
And the opportunity to interact with people that.
I mean, just one of your friends who I met yesterday, and she's an HR manager for IMAX theaters. This woman is poised and understands the world and its complexities, and any man of any race would be blessed to have her as a significant other. And I just think that we need to constantly put these paragons in the limelight to say, here's a beacon, here's a light of someone who is doing a good job, and that they should be rewarded, and that we should strive to understand what got them there, and give the young people in urban communities of color opportunities. I am the product of an opportunity. Somebody gave me
Right.
a 4.5-year scholarship to USC. Of course, it was through my hard work, but there was a vehicle, there was an opportunity. And had I not had that opportunity, I may not be sitting in this room. And I think the more we talk about those things, the more we contextualize Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter is not just about the moment and the current crisis in police and community tensions. It's well rooted in the fact that, oh, you know what? Welfare reform, Bill Clinton, it didn't necessarily go as planned. And both for white and black America, because what happened is it's not just a black and white problem. It is a social problem where people that are in marginalized communities feel like they are stuck, and they carry guns to protect themselves, and they happen to have them in their car when they're stopped for routine violations because they don't have money to fix broken tail lights. They don't have money to do certain things that the rest of society knows what to do. So of course police are going to find excuses for stopping them because they feel like they might be drug dealers or the thugs that they see in music videos or on social media. They're like, oh, I'm going to help get rid of those people because they're not, necessarily contributing to society. Well, if you don't ever see some other aspect of that community, like the artists and the people that are doing a good job in their churches and the Boys and Girls Club, at the soup kitchens, in church, being pastors, ministers, being the great bloggers of this nation, then what is your context?
And not just that, but
Or
even
frame of reference.
Yes.
right. But even in that, right? Even the the guys sagging with their pants half down, and the one with smoking a blunt, and they look a certain way. There's a story there too, and that there is a complexity there too.
Of course.
And just because you look like that or you've experienced that doesn't mean you don't have something to offer. People automatically think that men who are in gangs or men who look a certain way, this gangsta look, are stupid. Or aren't complex.
Or
disposable. And those are some of the smartest men I've ever run into or met. There's this kind of this thing that, black women and men, and black women and women in general think, and that's like, you want like a hood guy, but like with like a proper job, right? You want somebody who's like both, what do we say? We say we want somebody who is street smart, but still, kind of corporate. And the funny thing is, most of the men that I've ever been attracted to have always had that kind of street, kind of edge, kind of thug mentality, and it's not a dumb mentality. It's a very, we have great conversations. They have a lot of intellect, and they are introspective. But you look and you automatically judge and think that all men who look like this are this way. You don't think that they have something to offer. And so I challenge people to rethink whatever stories you're telling yourself about when you see someone and how they look and where they may come from and what their story may be. Because those stories are so complex. You have people who are thugs and have been in gangs, but their parents were in the civil rights movement. Their parents were Black Panthers. Their parents, started some fund, or so many different stories, And I just challenge people to not automatically think that every story is the same when you look at someone.
I think that's a very valid point. And I think one of the interesting aspects of the discussions that have emanated over the past several weeks, one of the good products is that people are starting to question whether they have implicit bias. And you've talked to us about implicit bias, right? It's like
we all have biases.
We all have biases.
We all do.
And you know what though? The the road to recovery is with acceptance first. If I accept that I have a certain bias, then I'm willing to check myself and ask, am I employing that bias in this exchange that I'm about to have right now? And how do I check myself? How do I tweak this conversation so that it doesn't go south? And
A lot of people don't have the insight to do that.
Right.
no,
That's
but
part of the
it's
problem.
important for us to really have to have that knowledge and be able to say, okay, I'm going to be better about my dialogue with you because I'm questioning whether I'm starting at a position where you are less than. So like if I were at the DMV and you're the woman behind the counter, I need to check myself. Am I going to treat you as the angry black woman who works for a government agency and expect you to be a certain way toward me? Like, do I already come to the window with that expectation? Are you going to shenane me in this conversation, or are you going to be Winter White, the awesome professional who knows every code in the book, and I'm going to get stellar treatment, and I'm going to just feel like the most important citizen in the world when I'm done with you? Should I start with that and have a disposition toward you where I extol you as the good government worker that you are, versus, oh, here we go again. Let's start this conversation. It's, engaging people at a level where I'm going to start with not just the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give you the benefit of a positive assessment. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to treat you.
It's a better starting point.
Yeah.
It's a better starting point with everybody.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that could take us to the highest echelons of solidarity and coexistence. But we have to give people that, in Bible school, they're like, everybody's Jesus Christ. You have to see God in every person. There is divinity in every child of God. Well, okay, so if there's divinity in every child of God, then why would I start thinking that you are out to kill me when I'm stopping you? Or for whatever reason, yes, we have that predatorial instinct where we're like fight or flight, but let me just start with putting you in a position where I'm going to trust you. And then from there, we can kind of scale back and say, oh, wait a minute, you've just proven yourself untrustworthy. But if I start, and if I imbue that in you, I can guarantee that person is going to change their behavior and they're going to chill. And you're going to deflect, and everything's going to be okay. And, as we wrap up this conversation, which has been so imbued with a lot of heavy lifting from both an experiential perspective and just a collection of our evaluations of what's out there, I'd like to leave our listeners with some call to action so that we are offering solutions and not just sort of festering in the problematic, right? So I just kind of want to open it up to you guys, some final thoughts and some calls to action. What can we do as people to make this world a better place, especially when it comes to race relations in this current environment?
I just want to inspire people to be socially conscious, to be culturally aware, to be a human being with empathy, with compassion, with understanding, tolerate difference, be open to acceptance, celebrate diversity, be a global citizen, be a proactive global citizen so you can, leave something valuable behind or make a contribution to society. It's easy to sit around and talk and, be argumentative. It's harder to be proactive, but the rewards are far greater, and be open to that.
I just want to echo what Tehu has said. Empathy is just the word that just keeps coming up into my mind, and that is for all sides of the coin. And to also just really take a hard look at what you've been taught and what your real thinking is with regards to race. Be honest with yourself, and if you don't understand a specific race or you have these preconceived notions, I dare you to kind of take a look outside of your world and what you know to be true and to try to see another perspective. And, like we were talking about with the media, tune into a show that you haven't watched on a network that is not one of the ones that you consistently view. Again, Centric, TV1, they have some great shows on African American culture, and you kind of get to see the different perspective and look and listen to it with an empathetic ear and not one that is wanting to retaliate or try to defend. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, and I think I would just encourage everyone to look at the opposing side. So if you've taken a side, look at the opposing side and really look for the complete story and try to gather facts from sources outside of your normal channels. I think we were laughing about the loss of Oprah as sort of a national mediator, but there really is a need for us to come together in a place that is neutralized and that really speaks to facts versus bias. And I think that, yes, we do need to look at different people that are sharing voices that are nuanced. And, an artist like Andra Day, who is really trying to promote music that is outside of the norm, out of the mainstream. Other voices that are out there, you should listen to them with an attentive ear, almost like if you were doing research. Pretend like you're back in high school or middle school or even college, and you're doing a research paper on something that you really want to learn about. Take that interest in the people of your nation, people that you don't know, because the more you learn about them, the more they will become less demystified and more part of your regular reality. And only when you see people in the light of neighbor, brother, and sister can you begin to love them and cherish them as the great members of society that they are and can be. So I really want to encourage you to take those bold steps. I think that it takes a village when it comes to making change, and that, as Margaret Mead reminds us, that the concerned citizens of a society are the ones that really make a change. So we hope that we have inspired you today to take those bold steps. We're always grateful to Dan House for his hospitality here in Santa Monica, California. And for Tehu Smythe and Winter White, I'm Alex Venegas. Make the world a better place.